Wow, I forgot how much work secondaries were, on top of the primaries too. If you guys are applying right now, Godspeed to you guys, because it's so much work. What up, gamers? Welcome back to my channel. So for those of you who are new here, a little bit about myself. My name is Michelle, and I recently graduated undergrad with a degree in biology and a minor in music. And in the fall, I will be attending med school. So I wanted to talk a bit about my process applying to med school, things I wish I knew before I applied, and mistakes I made. And hopefully this video will be helpful to some of you. So just a quick disclaimer. Obviously, all of this is going to be based on my own personal experience and things I specifically encountered while applying. So this is not going to be an all-encompassing video, so I highly recommend you also check out other people's videos about their experiences to help you get a more comprehensive understanding on the application process. So yeah, let's get started. So the first mistake I made was not studying enough for the MCAT. So this would probably come pretty obvious to people, but the MCAT is a pretty difficult and arduous exam that requires a lot of dedicated studying. And I honestly got pretty lazy because I was studying for the MCAT during the second semester junior year of college, which was a pretty rough semester for me. I was taking 3 STEM classes. I was taking biochem, physics, and a biology class for my bio major. So there was a lot going on. So my focus was always on studying for school because obviously those were way more pressing. Those exams were coming up way sooner than the MCAT. So I kept pushing aside my MCAT studying so that I could focus on studying for school. And it paid off for the most part. I did pretty well in those classes for that semester. But it's definitely something I didn't fully grasp until I was in it, how much it would be trying to juggle studying for 3 huge STEM classes while also studying for the MCAT. So if I were to go back, I would definitely have a more strict schedule, actually planning what I would study for the MCAT day by day, and that way I could kind of peer pressure myself into studying more. Some other things that would have helped my studying. So the first thing I should have done was take a practice test to set my baseline score. So your baseline score is basically where you're at before you start studying. So you know how much work you have to do to get to your goal score. Doing that as your first step in studying is also extremely important because then you understand what the test is actually like. A lot of the studying I was doing was just like reading and reviewing information about the different subjects, and that is completely different from what the MCAT is actually like. Taking a full-length exam is obviously way more grueling than just sitting there and flipping through a textbook. So if I had taken a practice exam right away, I would have known right away how ineffective my studying actually was at that point. So MCAS has a free full-length exam that you can do. You could probably also Google and find other free full-length MCAT practice exams. One that I've also heard of is Altius Test Prep. They give out like 5 full-length free exams. I'll put links in the description for those. Just a side note, this video is not sponsored, by the way. I'm just recommending whatever useful resources I found, and hopefully they're helpful to you. Another really useful resource that I discovered way too late was UWorld. So UWorld is this online question bank. It's a subscription, and you get access to all their practice questions, and you can customize it however you want. You can customize the number of questions, which subjects you get seen, etc., etc. And it's really useful because it's timed. You can treat it as if you're like practicing a whole section of the exam, or you could focus on specific sections within specific subjects that you're tricky on. For example, like chemistry, you're really bad at thermodynamics or something. You could focus on that specifically. And it's also really helpful because the format is very similar to what the actual MCAT is like, and it gives you explanations afterwards about each of the questions. So you can find out exactly what you did wrong with your thought process and how to find the right answer. So yeah, highly recommend UWorld. I started using that way too late. So the second mistake I made was not having enough clinical and shadowing experience. And this is mostly my opinion reflecting on myself, because most med schools usually don't have a set minimum of shadowing and clinical experience that's required. They usually recommend somewhere between like 100 and like 500 hours, I think, which I definitely did not get anywhere close to. And I'll talk a bit more about the specific experiences I did in a later video, but just a quick mention, I did an EMT class, I volunteered at the hospital near my school, I volunteered in hospice for a little bit, and I also did some in-person and virtual shadowing. So part of the issue was I took an EMT class and I got certified, but I never actually worked as an EMT. So if I'd done that, that would definitely have given me more hours and also some money. I volunteered at the hospital, but ideally I would have started doing it earlier because I started doing it sophomore year. If I'd done it freshman year, that would have helped. That being said, it was COVID, so there's that. And I also did hospice volunteering, but I did it over the summer and it took a really long time to get the processing of it. So I only did it for like 4 weeks, 1 hour each. So in total, only 4 hours. But if you're looking for some different clinical experiences that you could do. Hospice volunteering is definitely a more unique one that I haven't heard people talk about as much. So if you want to do something that stands out a bit more, hospice volunteering might be something to look at. And basically what I did was I just Googled hospice volunteering, and I found some places in my area that were looking for volunteers, and I just applied to one. Those are the clinical and volunteer experiences I personally had. Highly recommend you just Google and look up other experiences, and maybe some of them would interest you. I know some other ones include like medical scribe and CNA, but I personally have not done them. So if you're interested in that, definitely do more research. Regarding shadowing, something I wish I had known about sooner is virtual shadowing, because that became a huge thing during my early years of college because of COVID, but I didn't really know about it until later, and at that point it was like a bit too late. I really wish I'd known about it sooner, because that would have been a great way to gather a lot more shadowing hours. But I did end up using a couple of them. So MedSchoolCoach is one great resource for virtual shadowing. They also have a bunch of other stuff that's really helpful, which I'll talk about a bit more later. Prehealthshadowing.com is another virtual shadowing resource that I used, and with a quick Google search, I also found Medical School Headquarters. They have a YouTube channel where they post all their Zoom recordings, so that's something you guys can check out as well. So the third big mistake I made was not researching medical schools enough. So honestly, I got pretty lazy just at the end of junior year, having to study for the MCAT, taking the MCAT, having to start applying to schools, and at that point I was just so tired of it. So I did not even research schools that closely until I really had to. I just kept procrastinating it. And I was also just so unsure on how to narrow down schools. So this is definitely something that I still to this day do not know much about, because I just never properly did it. I kind of just narrowed down on random things like location, whether or not their GPA and MCAT ranges were fitting with me, and also their mission statement. I was looking more for schools that were serving urban areas, because that's preferably where I would live. But something you should definitely be aware of is extra requirements that a school has, because there are general prereqs that pretty much every school requires, which are like Gen Bio, Gen Chem, Orgo, Biochem, Physics. But be aware that some schools might have extra requirements, such as a year of math or English. Most DO schools require a year of English, so that's something to keep in mind. I think a lot of schools actually do take AP scores. Extra prereqs, that's definitely something to look out for. Something else is residency bias. So you can look up on the school's website. Sometimes they say straight out if they have a preference for students who are from the state that the school is in. So a good example of this is most schools in California have a residency bias. So they prefer students who are from the state of California. That doesn't mean that you won't get in if you apply and you're from out of state, but you definitely have a way better chance of getting in if you're from in-state. So a generally great resource for just information about MD schools is called the MSAR. So this is a resource I highly recommend if you're mostly looking at MD schools. Every MD school is on there as far as I know. It gives you a lot of information about the schools. So it tells you their average matriculant MCAT and GPA, and pretty much any information you want to know, like their prereqs, mission statement, contact information, and they actually also specifically have a section about residency bias. So it'll say right there if the school prefers students from in-state. But yeah, just an FYI, MSAR is subscription based. It's like $20 to $30 for a year-long subscription, but if you think it might be very useful for you, it's definitely something to consider. But yeah, that's just for MD schools though. DO schools are not on there. Going back to the residency bias thing, as I said, you could usually find information about it on their website. Alternatively, you could also Google it. Sometimes people will talk about it on Reddit or other resources. Sometimes the school talks about it in their FAQ section, and sometimes they say they don't have a residency bias, but if you find their matriculant data, you might see that they said they didn't have a residency bias, but then you notice that most of the students come from the state that the school is in. Sometimes that's just because more students from that state applied to go to that school, but it is something to keep in mind. Also, side note, in case you didn't know, matriculant means you applied to the school, you got in, and you're attending the school. But again, it's not a hard line. If you're really interested in the school and you have good stats, maybe you can still apply, but it's definitely a good idea to be aware of whether they have a residency bias, because you don't want to spend money applying to a school just to be eliminated based on where you're from. But one thing I learned is, for the most part, public schools tend to have a residency bias because they're publicly funded by taxes, whereas private schools tend to not have a residency bias because they're funded privately. So that's a tip if you're unsure of whether the school might have a residency bias or not. So next I wanted to talk about something I would have done differently if I had known, which is applying to MD and DO. So just a bit of background in case you didn't know, there's MD, which is allopathic medical school, and then there's DO, which is osteopathic medical school. So DO medical students learn the same thing as MD students, but they also learn something called OMT, which is osteopathic manipulative therapy. Basically, the philosophy of DO is focused on holistic healing, so looking at the whole body, treating the patient and not the symptom, and also preventative health. So looking at lifestyle changes and ways that patients can help improve their health that don't involve going straight to prescription medicine. And again, if you're applying to med school, you should definitely know more thoroughly about these things before you apply, especially if you're applying to DO. So I learned about DO schools when I was a sophomore in college, and the DO philosophy really spoke to me. But when I applied to medical school, I applied to both MD and DO schools. But if I were to go back right now, I would have just applied to DO schools. Honestly, in my opinion, in hindsight, if you're interested in DO schools, you should just apply to DO schools. And the reason I say that is because DO schools tend to have a lower matriculant MCAT and GPA. So in a way, they're easier to get into than MD schools. So if you have really good stats and you're interested in DO, it's honestly just more worthwhile for you to just apply to DO because you probably have a pretty good chance of getting into a DO school, and that is what you're passionate about. So in my opinion, there's no reason wasting your time trying to apply to MD schools, which have more competition and higher average scores, and is something that you're not as passionate about. Also, if you just apply to one program, either DO or MD, you don't have to waste as much time trying to tweak your application so that they fit for both programs. Because one, if you're applying DO, you want to tailor it more towards the DO philosophy. So you want to talk about treating people and holistic medicine, and specifically why you're interested in osteopathic medicine. And on top of that, there's also 2 completely different application portals, so you have to fill in all your information twice. And on top of that, the application portals are different, so there are different character limits for some things, and you also have to re-enter all your grades. And let me tell you, that was so annoying to do because you have to be thorough and you have to be accurate. So having to enter that in by hand twice and double check it was not fun. So yeah, like I said, if you're interested in DO, I highly recommend you just apply to DO. I feel like a lot of students apply to both, but I feel like a lot of those people were people who are interested in MD. Basically what they're doing is they're applying to MD school because that's what they actually want to do, but they're also applying to DO school so that if they don't get into any MD schools, they hopefully will get into some DO schools. But like I said, you should just apply to the program that you're truly passionate about. If you're passionate about both, that's awesome. Then you probably would apply to both. But if you're just interested in one or the other, it's better to just apply to that specific program. Because DO schools also know that some people are maybe just applying to DO because they're treating it as a backup. So if you're applying to DO, you want to show that it's something you're actually passionate about and have your personal statement and activities reflect that. And again, I'll talk more about this in a later video, but I purposely tailored my personal statement so that it would talk more specifically about preventative health and holistic medicine. And when I talked about my activities, I also talked about how I liked some specific aspects of it that aligned with osteopathic medicine. Again, I'll talk more about this in a later video, so if you're curious about that, let me know, and I will definitely highlight those more. I feel like I'm kind of rambling, but hopefully everything I've said so far makes sense. Another big thing about DO schools is a lot of them require a letter of recommendation from a DO physician. So that is one big way that they try to rule out people who aren't truly interested in osteopathic medicine. And I found this out way too late. While I was applying to DO schools, I found this spreadsheet that listed all the DO schools, and whoever made it was super helpful. They had a specific section that said whether or not that specific school required a letter from a DO, or if they required a letter at all. And what I found is a lot of DO schools require a letter of recommendation from a DO doctor, and I didn't have one. So that immediately eliminated a lot of the DO schools. So I end up with only about like 20 of them that I maybe could apply to. So yeah, that's definitely something to keep in mind if you're interested in DO. You need to shadow a DO doctor and you need to get a letter of recommendation from them. So regarding applying to MD and DO schools, as I mentioned earlier, the application portals for the 2 programs are quite different. So one main difference is the activities section. So for the MCAS, which is the application portal for MD schools, for every single activity, you get 700 characters to describe the activity and stuff you did. And within that, you can designate up to 3 activities as most meaningful. So those would be the ones that had the most impact on you or highlight the message of your personal statement more. So for the 3 that you designate as most meaningful, you get an extra 1,325 characters to talk about it. You can also log future activities, but keep in mind that in total you can only log up to 15 activities, including present activities and also future activities. But for the AACOMAS, which is the application portal for DO schools, you only get a character count of 600, regardless of the activity. There's no most meaningful designation, so there's no way for you to have extra characters. You get 600 characters for any and every activity that you want to talk about, period. So yeah, regarding that, they actually don't have an activity limit. You can log as many activities as you want, but unlike the MCAS, they also don't allow you to log future activities. So if you know you have something lined up that you haven't started yet, you can't log it. But a lot of times on secondaries, there might be a space where schools ask you about new activities you've started since you've applied, or there are sections where you have to re-log every single activity you've done. Wow, I forgot how much work secondaries were, on top of the primaries too. If you guys are applying right now, Godspeed to you guys, because it's so much work. But yeah, that's a key difference between the two application portals that I didn't discover until I was applying. It would have been nice to know ahead of time, because I was writing some of my essays ahead of time, and I didn't know about the difference in character limit, so then I had to re-edit all my essays from 700 characters to 600 characters to fit AACOMAS. So yeah, definitely something that's good to know ahead of time. So some other helpful tips, I mentioned them earlier, but medschoolcoach. So I only use their free resources. They also have some paid things that you can use, like application editing and like one-on-one mentoring and other stuff like that, I think. But the things I use from them that I'm gonna recommend to you are completely free. So they have some informational Zooms, which include how to apply to med school, interview tips, personal statement tips, like those kind of things. So I think if you sign up for their email list, you will get notifications whenever they have a Zoom coming up. Something else I use that I highly recommend is their free guidebooks. So the two main ones I used were their guide to becoming a physician and interview tips. So the guide to becoming a physician, they talk about applying to med school, how to write a personal statement, etc. So that one is super helpful if you just like don't even know where to start. The other one I used is their interview tips. So it talks about how to prepare for the day, what to expect, how to dress, and they also have a bunch of practice questions. So I highly recommend those two. I'll put links in the description for all their free guidebooks. And like I mentioned earlier, they also have virtual shadowing. So they have a bunch of Zooms of different physicians. As far as I saw, they were mostly MD doctors. So if you want to do some virtual shadowing for DO doctors, go to prehealthshadowing.com, which was another resource I mentioned earlier. But yeah, my final tip for you guys, honestly, if you're watching this video, you're probably already doing it, but it's Google stuff. If you have a question, if there's something you're not sure about, if you want examples of personal statement essays, if you want practice interview questions, you can look up resources on Google, or you can look up helpful tips on YouTube. It's definitely super helpful, and it's definitely something I used when I was applying to med school. You can also find like med school influencers on Instagram. For example, It's Life by Maggie and Becoming Dr. Devore. But yeah, please like this video if you found it helpful and want more content like this. Also feel free to leave some questions in the comments below and I'll try to answer them. And I'm planning to make a video talking more in depth about my applications, where I talk about my MCAT, my GPA, extracurriculars I've done, and also maybe my activities essays and my personal statement if you guys are interested in that. But yeah, that will be coming sometime in the near future, so subscribe if you want to see it. And I also plan on making med school vlogs when I'm in med school starting in the fall, so if you guys want to see that, subscribe for that as well. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye!